Good morning everyone. Welcome to another video here at Recognizance. For today's discussion, we will talk about the different stages of execution in the commission of felony. But before we will discuss on the different stages in the execution of the felony, we will talk first about the criminal intent and criminal acts. When we talk of criminal intent, it is not punishable by law. Why? Because your intent is still in the mind of the perpetrator. Wala pa siya act nga gihimo. Napala si mo hunahuna. Napasi mo hunahuna mo tawag ka og criminal intent. While when you talk of criminal act, the criminal act may be punishable by law. Why? Because there was already a result or an effect in the commission of a crime. Because there were already the so-called acts of execution. However, there is one instance where criminal intent is punished by law, or is punishable by law, and that is the impossible crime. Why? Because under Article 59 of the RPC, this provides that impossible crime, which is defined under Article 4 of the RPC, which I already discussed, na punishable siya under Article 59 because of the criminal intent, because of the evil intent, or the criminal tendency to commit a crime, or the criminal propensity to commit a crime. The criminal act here may not be punishable. Why? Because of the impossibility, because of the inherent impossibility of its accomplishment by reason of inadequate or ineffectual means. That is why, or here in my example, the criminal intent is punishable under Article 59 of the RPC. But most of the criminal intent is not punishable. Now, we'll proceed on the stages of execution. So we have 3 stages in the execution of felonies. We have the attempted stage or the attempted felonies, frustrated felonies, and consummated felonies. What do you mean by consummated felonies? A consummated felony or a felony is consummated when all the elements necessary for its execution and accomplishment are present. Meaning to say, there is nothing left to be done. All of the necessary or all of the elements or all of the execution and accomplishment are present. Meaning, kompleto, nahimo nimo ang tanan. Kung nagplano ka nga imuhang patyon sa A, imuhang gipusil, nga namatay, of course, there is a consummated. Why? Ang imuhang plano, ni-effect mo siya into a result of killing to your target. Muna gitawag na to consummated. Walay mga intervention nga nahitabo. Walay other person nga nahimo nga babag sa imuhang paghimo sa krimen. So, that is consummated. While frustrated, it is when the offender performs all the acts of execution which would produce the felony as a consequence, but which nevertheless do not produce it by reason of causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. So, meaning to say, kung ingon tag frustrated, ni-perform na sa iyahang acts of execution, tanan iyan ang gihimo. Perform all the acts of execution. So, kung si A, iyahang gustong patyon si B, din naka-inflict siya og mortal wound, nga wala namatay, it's because of the intervention independent of the will of A, which is an intervention coming from a physician, then the crime committed is in the frustrated stage. Nga naman, wala man namatay ang imong target kay natambalan man sa physician. And of course, it must be nga gitawag na to og mortal wound or fetal wound para mosulod ta sa frustrated. So, third is the attempted felony or in the attempted stage. Attempted, it is when the offender commences the commission of a felony directly by overt acts and does not perform all the acts of execution, which should produce the felony by reason of some cause of accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. So the difference between attempted, frustrated, and consummated is on the performance in the commission of the crime. Why? Because in attempted stage, the offender does not perform all the acts of execution to produce the felony. And by reason, tungod sa rason or accident nga dili siya ang rason nga wala madayon ang pag-perform niya sa pag-commit sa usa ka krimen. Muna siyang attempted stage. Now, before we will proceed to the different requisites or elements in the stages of the execution of the crime or of the felony, we will discuss first the so-called development of a crime. So in the development of the crime, there are two acts involved. We have the internal acts and we have the external acts. When we talk of internal acts, it is the same with the intent na wala pa nimo siya gi-execute, naapa na siya sa imuhang hunahuna. It is only a mere planning to commit a crime. And therefore, di ka ma-held liable. Nga naman, imuha pa man ang giplano, wala pa man nimo gi-execute. Imo pa lang giplano, wala pa nimo gi-execute ang pag-commit sa usa ka krimen. Now, on the second act in the development of a crime is the so-called external acts. Meaning, kung yung external acts, nanana siya gitawag nato nga result. Nanana siya gihimo si perpetrator. The external acts is divided into two parts. We have the preparatory acts and the acts of execution. When we talk of preparatory acts, it is ordinarily not punishable by law. Kay preparatory pa man siya, meaning wala pa nimong gi-commit. Wala pa'y acts of execution. Now, the conspiracy and proposal to commit a felony is not punishable by law. As a general rule, is not punishable by law. And conspiracy and proposal to commit a felony is considered as a preparatory acts. Nga naman, nagplano pa man mo. Nagplano pa mo sa preparatory acts. And the consummation or sa pag-commit sa krimen, giplanuhan pa ninyo. So, preparatory pa lang siya. General rule. However, conspiracy and proposal to commit a felony is not punishable, unless there is a law that provides a penalty thereof. Kung pananglitan na ay nakaprovide na sa RPC nga conspiracy and proposal to commit a felony is punishable by law, then it is punishable. So therefore, ang imuhang preparatory acts anang time is punishable na. Say for example, in conspiracy and proposal to commit rebellion, it is provided under the RPC. Then your preparatory acts of making conspiracy and proposal to commit rebellion is punishable by law. So, punishable lang imuhang preparatory acts for conspiring and confederating to commit a crime kung naibalaod nilang prohibit. Kung wala ibalaod nilang prohibit, then it is not punishable. Now, another example. When A buy a poison, palisag poison, ang iyang intent is to kill B. Now, say for example, ibutang nato na hibawaan nga iyang patyon. Dayon giingon nga dakpon kay nasa intent nagpalisag hilo basi ang hiloan. So sakto ba nga dakpon na nato si kuan or madakpan na ka? The answer is no. Why? The act of buying a poison is still on the preparatory acts. It is unclear for us to determine kung unsay buhaton sa poison. Pwede niyang ihilos sa ilaga. Pwede niyang or iyang buhaton not to kill a person. So, napa siya sa preparatory acts. unclear pa siya. Unclear pa siya. So, but in the case of having a picklocks is different case. In order to open the door or makaabli ka sa drawer, so a mere position ng picklocks, preparatory na siya, nakakaana, is punishable na siya. Nga naman, kay na may nag-prohibit nga balaod, nga kung picklocks is punishable by law. Although it is preparatory. It is a preparatory to open the door, it is a preparatory to open the drawer in order to commit robbery. So nga na siya ang preparatory acts. Tanawan mo, if there is a law that prohibits such preparatory acts, then it is punishable. Kung wala siya nag-prohibit, then it is not punishable. Pareha ito akong example, nga napalit kag poison sa tindahan, dayon, di ka pwedeng dakpon unless it is not prohibited by law. Kay, your act of buying a poison is unclear or unequivocal. Dili siya certain, it is uncertain nga para i-determine, napalit kag poison, manghilo ka, so dili ingon ana. So now, arita sa acts of execution. From the preparatory acts, adto ta sa acts of execution. Now, going back on my example about sa nagpalit og poison. Now, nagpalit og poison sa A, dayon iyahang gisagol didto sa kape. For example, dito sa kape nga imnon, imnon unta ni B. Now, nasagol na. Nasagol na. Kay nasagol naman, padung nun ta mo inom si B. However, pagdayog inom niya is nabugwak niya tungod sa kainit or natagak barong baso, nabuak ang baso. So, katato siyang gihimo ni A nga iyahang giloan, there is already an act of execution. Na siya act of execution nga iyahang hiluan, hiluan si B. But because of the cause or accident nga dili niya kagustuhan, other than his own spontaneous desistance, wala na inom ni B, then ang iyahang acts of execution is in the attempted stage. Nasa attempted stage ang iyahang act of execution. Kaya nga naman, wala man na perform ang acts of execution. Tanan nga all acts of execution. Kay there was an accident nga na buak ang baso, which is other than the spontaneous desistance of A, which is the one who committed the crime. So, wala siya ang gitawag nitong acts of execution. Pwede na natong i-apply ang stages in the commission of a felony. Either it is on the attempted stage, either it is on the prostrated stage, and either it is on the consummated stage. Now, we will proceed on the different elements. Different elements of attempted felony. What is the first element? The first element of attempted felony is the offender commences the commission of felony directly by overt acts. So meaning, when we talk of commences the commission of a felony, there is already an external act. Na siya external act? Kay commences, he begins to commit a felony. There is already an external act to speak of. Directly by overt acts. Meaning to say directly by overt acts, it must be connected to the crime to be committed. It is direct. There is direct connection or there is link on the intended crime to be committed. So muna siya pasabot sa paragraph 1 sa elements. There is an external act and the act must have a direct connection for the crime that is intended to be committed. Now, going back on my example about ni A nga nagpalit siya og poison. Sa pagpalit niya poison ni A, nga iyang intent is iyang hiluan si B, for example, sa iyang pagpalit, dili pa na nimo pwedeng mabutang sa attempted stage. Why? Because his acts of buying a poison nga pwede natong i-consider as an external act, but dili nato siya makonek into directly by overt acts. Because buying a poison is dili pa nato ma-certain or dili pa nato ma-determine, dili pa klaro nga ang iyang pagpalit is mopatay og tao. So, there must be a connection. para ma-consider nato nga mosulod ta aning commences the commission of a felony directly by overt acts. Kuha. Now, second paragraph, he does not perform all the acts of execution which should produce the felony. Meaning, wala niya nahimo ang tanan nga acts of execution, which is the last act. Ang last act ang gitawag nato is, or ang yang pagsugod niya sa pag-commit sa krimen is wala gid siya mo abot sa gitawag nato nga subjective phase. Sa objective phase. Wala pa siya niabot sa objective phase. Naa pa siya sa subjective phase. Supposedly, na pa siya control ang tana. Nga, wala gyapon niya na-perform ang all acts of execution. So, unsa din na siyang gitawag na itong subjective phase? Unsa sa nang gitawag na itong objective phase? When we talk of subjective phase, magsugod ta, begin or commences from the commission of a felony. From that time, napay control si perpetrator whether to continue the commission of the crime or whether not to continue the commission of the crime. Muna siyang gitawag ng subjective phase. But kung musulod na ka sa objective phase, si offender has no longer control or he can no longer control in the commission of the crime. Wala na siya control. Nga naman, na-perform naman niya ang all acts of execution. So, muna natin yung tag-objective phase, na-perform na niya ang all acts of execution. Kung yung tag-subjective phase, wala pa siya, does not perform. Does not perform all the acts of execution. Now, the offender's act is not stopped by his own spontaneous. Meaning to say, para masulod na tong attempted stage, ang iyang gihimo is dili siya mismo. It's not stopped by his own spontaneous desistance. Kinahanglan, it is an intervention from another person, or it may be a cause or accident nga nahimo nga wala nahitabo ang pag-commit niya sa krimen. Kay kung pananglitan iyahan ng own spontaneous desistance, then according to the book of Sir Luis Reyes, kung siya mismo ang naghimo sa desistance nga para dili makomit ang krimen, then according to him, the perpetrator or the culprit of the crime may not be held liable, because according to him, it is a sort of reward. It is a sort of reward granted by law for having in the verge of the crime heed to the call of his conscience and return back to his righteousness. So meaning, kung ikaw mismo, for example, arita sa offender's stop by his own spontaneous desistance, ikaw mismo ang nagpahunong sa imong gihimong krimen, supposedly, baliktan ni A o B, palit og poison si A, dayon gibutang sa kape ngadto ni B, gisagol ni A. Now, padung na mo inom si A. Padung na mo inom. Niingon si kanang taysa bay inom kay mura og na hugaw na ganiha nga na butangan mo grason, so wala na inom, niyabo nimo. So meaning, does not perform all the acts of execution, niya gi-stop nimo by your own spontaneous desistance. Imuhang kaugalingon. So, according to the book of Sir Luis Reyes, then, dili ma-held liable si A. Why? Kay iyaha man lang kaugalingong spontaneous desistance. Nga niya na siya nga, it is a sort of reward granted by law for having a 1 foot for the verge of the commission of the crime and heed to the call of its conscience and returning back to its righteousness. So, mao na nga di siya ma-held liable. Provided nga, you still have on the subjective phase. Kay kung mo lukso na ka on the objective phase, where you cannot control, you can no longer control in the commission of the crime. Nga naman, kay ni-perform na maka sa all acts of execution, din useless ang imong spontaneous desistance. So nga na siya. But to another author, according to Judge Marlo Campanilla, however, when such spontaneous desistance has already resulted to the commission of the crime, then he is liable for such acts he was committed. So, yung na siya, kinanawa sa nimo, kung nasa krimen na commit, nga ihan nang gikuha, iyang withdraw ang ihang paghimo sa krimen, nga commit na siya, then, imo siyang tagaan. O, for example, kung theft, nga na, hadlok siya, so, na siya ay tulubagon. So, depende sa situation. Now, fourth paragraph, the non-performance of all acts of execution was due to cause or accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. So, muna mag-mention ganiha, does not perform man siya, di ba? Does not perform all the acts of execution. Balik ta sa poison. Now, hiloan. Karon, padung na mo inom unta. Padung mo inom, pero nalabay. Kay, tungod sa kainit, nabugwak ba ron, or nalabay ang baso, so pwede na ito mo considered as an accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. So, dili man na siya spontaneous desistance ni A. Nga siya mo'y naghilo kay it was an accident nga nabuwak ang baso. It is an accident nga nayabo ang kape. So supposedly kung nainom pa to, di mamatay unta si B kay nahilo man. So naay consummated crime of murder because killing a person using a poison is considered as a murder. Now kay na thrown away man or na throw away ang katong kape nga supposedly na ay hilo nga imnununta ni B dayon nabuwak ang baso, so there was an accident, so liable si A on the attempted stage in the commission of the crime of murder. Nasabtan. So muna siya does not perform all the acts of execution by reason of some cause or accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. Another example para masabtan. Sa Costa. So sa Costa ha, kung si A na siya ay wallet. For example, na wallet si A, and then, ang ihang wallet is naisulod na 200,000 pesos. Then, here comes B. Na si B. Iyahang padung niyang kuhaon ang pitaka ni B. But because of the timely discovery by A, nabantayan niya nga kuhaon niyang pitaka ni B. So, wala nakuha ni B, kaya nabantayan man ni A. So, there was a cause, naay rason, because of the timely discovery of A, nga wala nahitabo ang pagpunguha sa pitaka. Non-performance of all acts of execution was due to cause. Cause na siya. Nga nang wala nakuha. Kaya nabantayan dayon. Aritas accident. So accident. Say for example, A aimed the revolver or the pistol to B. Gitutok na. Now, upon squeezing the trigger, gikablit, ni jump, and the bullet or wala ni buto ang armas. The bullet di na fired pero or wala ning buto pero naka-squeeze siya. So, ang rason it's because of the accident. Nga aksidente nga wala ni buto kay supposedly kablito na nimong kuan nga nagoy bala. So, mapatay gid na nimo kay nga naman na may trajectory sa balit padung ngadto sa imuhang target. Now kay wala man ni jump man ang bala, wala na igo si or wala ka buto ang armas, so there was an accident. Ang sa maimuha na, i-apply nga stage. So, ari ka sa attempted stage. Why? There was already an external act. Ang external act is ang pagtutok sa armas, gikablit. Directly by overt acts. Yes. Kung sa imuhang gustong mahitabo, imong pat yun. There is direct connection. Yes, there is direct connection. Does not perform all the acts of execution. Yes, he does not perform. Nga naman, ang imuhang intent is to kill B. Wala ni mo na perform magpatay ni B, it's because of the accident which is other than your spontaneous desistance. Kaya kung wala pa to ning jump ang bala, of course, mubuto to, mapatay ni mo yung target. So, dili na sa to siya attempted. Maybe atong sa to sa frustrated or consummated, depende sa situation. But for now, atong gipasabot is attempted stage ta. Ni jump man ang bala, of course, dili siya mamatay. Attempted stage na siya. Okay? So what is indeterminate offense? Indeterminate offense, it is one where the purpose of the offender in performing an act is not certain. Its nature in relation to its objective is ambiguous. So there is one case that talks about an indeterminate offense. Here is, in a case of People versus Lamahang, the final objective of the offender, once he succeeded in entering the store, may be to rob, to cause physical injury, or to commit any other offense. In such case, there is no justification in finding offender guilty of attempted robbery by the use of force upon things. Why? Kaya kini mo siyang indeterminate offense, or in the case of People versus Lamahang. So, ang pasabutan ni ang facts gamay nga facts is si offender is padulong siya mosulod sa balay. Then iyahang guba ang usa ka board and unfasten the wall. Nagbuhat siya murag agianan ba? Entrance. But before entering ngadto sa iyang opening nga gihimo, he was arrested by the police officer. So meaning ang katong pag-arrest ngadto ni Lamahang is subject for different interpretation. Munang gitawag siya indeterminate offense. Nga naman, di man nato ma-determinar kung ang iyahang pagsulod dito, mupatay ba siya tao, mangawat ba siya, kay padulong pa man siya makasulod. Padulong pa man siya makasulod. And then, nasakpan siya. Therefore, pwede tang musulod ato sa stage, on the attempted stage, nga atong i-apply is attempted, trespass to dwelling. Nga naman, wala pa man siya kasulod sa balay, nga nasakpan na siya, naaresto na siya sa pulis, so attempted trespass to dwelling ang pwede. Di ka pwedeng moingon nga attempted robbery or by force upon things, attempted homicide, attempted rape. Nga naman, di man mo ma-predict. The second act or the intent of the accused is not certain. It is unclear. Nga naman, dili nimo mahibaw-an kung unsa ang iyang intention sa pagsulod dito sa balay. But the act of entering another house is mo constitute siya trespass to dwelling. But before siya makasulod is nadakpa naman siya sa police officer. So, it is on the attempted stage. Nga naman masad, because he does not perform all the acts of execution. Napugnan siya, it's because of other than his own spontaneous resistance. It's because of the presence of the police officer na nadakpan siya. So, mo na siya ang attempted stage. Ang indeterminate offense sad, kay mao sa nagitawag nato nga is not certain, subject for different interpretation pag yun, basta mingon tag indeterminate offense. So, indeterminate offense is different from a formal crimes. Why? Kay mingon sa tag formal crimes, it is a crimes that are consummated in one instant. Meaning, wala sa na siya stages in the commission of the crime. Automatically consummated na siya. See, for example, libel, perjury, slander by deed, so, and any other crimes nga makonsummate siya in one instance. Di ni siya muagi og gitawag na to nga stages in the commission of the crime. Whereas, when we talk of material crimes, mo na siya nga there are 3 stages in the commission of the crime: attempted, frustrated, and consummated. So we'll proceed on the elements of frustrated felony. Now, what are the elements of frustrated felony? First, the offender performs all the acts of execution. Meaning to say, nahimo na niya. Nahimo na niya ang acts of execution except ang last act, which is nga mapatay nimo ang imong target. But as a whole, you perform all the acts of execution to effect sa imong intent, which is to kill a person. Second paragraph. All the acts performed would produce the felony as a consequence. Tanan nimong gihimo, si for example, imo na siyang gipusil og kaduha na nakigibutang naigo na siya, mortal wound. Mortal wound ang igo. Or fatal wound. Muna siya perform would produce the felony as a consequence. What is the consequence? To kill your target. Nahimo na nimo tanan. Paragraph 3. But the felony is not produced. So wala daw nahitabo nga na-produce ang pagpatay sa usa ka tawo nga mao imong intent ug nahimo na nimo ang tanan nga execution except the last act, which is the last act nga mamatay ang imong target. Kaya nga naman, because of the paragraph 4, by reason of causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. Since naa may rason nga dili gikan nimo, that is independent, independent of the will of the perpetrator, nga wala siya nimo na patay. So, alita sa frustrated stage. Say for example, si A, iyahang gipusil si B. Igo, mortal wound. Mortal wound ang samad. Now, ana si A, patay na to. Kay, igo na sa dughan niya. Pikas, ipon ang panakaw dapit sa abagay nga. Gisure niya. But because of the timely and skills of by the physician, because of the timely treatment or skill of the physician, wala namatay si B. Even though mortal ang iyang wound, even though fatal ang iyang wound, wala namatay. Muna gitawag na to by reason of causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. Kay ang iyang pagtuo mapatay na, kay mortal wound na god. Pero kay tungod sa gitambalan siya sa physician, gitambalan si B sa doktor, wala napatay. Muna ano to sa frustrated stage. Sabdan, kay kung ang wound is not mortal, kung ang wound is not fatal, dili ka pwedeng musulod sa frustrated stage. Ari ka sa kining gitawag nato nga attempted stage. Nga naman, wala man nimo matawag nato nga makaingon ka nga patay na to. Kay nahimo nimo for example ang pagpatay niya nga mo inflict ka og mortal wound or fatal wound. That is why kung non-mortal wound or not fatal ang wound, adto ta sa attempted stage. Okay? So another example on the elements of frustrated felony. Here is A. So ibutan nato si A nga doktor. So doktor si A. Now, iyang plano is iyang hiluan iyang asawa. And then, while nagkaon sila, iyang gisagol ang hilo ngadto sa iyang asawa. Nagikaon siyang asawa. Then, of course, pag human og kaon, naglisod ang iyang asawa, naglisod og ginhawa. So mortal ang effect. Grabe, fatal ang effect sa hilo nga gihimo ni A ngadto sa iyang asawa. Now, kay naluoy siya sang asawa, si A naluoy siya. Nakonsensya siya nagtao siyang asawa nga ga lisod, ga kirig-kirig. Si for example, tungod sa hilo nga iyahang gisagol sa pagkaon. Iyahang gitambalan, di ba doktor siya? Iyahang gitambalan iyang asawa. Now, sa pagtambal niya siyang asawa, of course, naulian. But, na yung mga injury nga na-inflict nga to sa iyang asawa. Now, pangutana, pwede ba natong i-apply ang frustrated stage on the crime of, say for example, parricide kay iha mga asawa? So, pwede ba natong ma-apply ang frustrated stage? The answer is no. Ganun dili man. Because of paragraph 4. Lacking ang paragraph 4 nga kining gitawag nato nga by reason of causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. Kinsa man to siyang rason nga natambalan ang iyang asawa nga wala mamatay? Di ba? Ni Dr. A, kinsay naghilo? Di ba? Si Dr. A. Therefore, dili siya masulod sa independent of the will of the perpetrator. Kay mayroon mong utag independent of the will of the perpetrator. This it should be or it must be an intervention from a third person. Dili gikan niya nga kung kinsay nag-commit sa krimen. Nakuha. Karon, dili ma-apply ang frustrated Dili ma-apply ang frustrated kay tungod kay dili siya third person. Kung dili siya mismo ang nagtambal siyang asawa. Now, apply na to ang attempted stage. Attempted stage ta. Now, based on the facts that I have been mentioned, ningon ko nga mortal ang wound. So meaning kay mortal man, isod na to nga all acts performed would produce the felony as a consequence. Now, unsay nakabutang dito sa attempted? Ningon ang attempted does not perform all the acts of execution. Since does not perform man siya all the acts of execution, dili nato masulod sa attempted. Kaya nga naman, si Dr. A ni-perform na siya sa all acts of execution. Therefore, dili na siya masulod sa attempted. So karon unsa man day atong i-file nga kaso ngadto ni Dr. A. Di man pwede attempted parricide kay based on the facts perform naman siya all the acts of execution. Di sad nato pwede i-apply si frustrated nga naman because the number 4 or paragraph 4 is lacking. Okay? Ang paragraph 4 sa frustrated by reason of causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. And of course, di sad nato pwede i-apply si consummated nga naman dakong buhi man yang asawa. Now, unsa may atong i-apply? So, we will file a case against Dr. A for the crime of physical injuries. Why? Because from the time nga gitambalan niya yang asawa, intent to kill kay nawala. Di man eh. The intent to kill sa iyang asawa is nawala from the time nga iyang gitambalan. Therefore, ang atong i-file nga kaso nga pwedeng ma-file nato is physical injuries ngadto sa iyang asawa. Okay? Nagkasabot ha sa ingon ana, timan ana to, yung frustrated, there must be an intervention coming from a third person. When you talk of attempted, atong timan permi nga does not perform all the acts of execution. And the acts of execution is on the subjective phase. While on frustrated, the act of execution is on the objective phase. Huh? When we talk of objective phase, the perpetrator or the culprit in the commission of the crime can no longer control in the commission of the crime. Now, let us distinguish between frustrated felony to attempted felony. In both, the offender has not accomplished his criminal purpose. Of course, ang sa iyang criminal purpose, the criminal purpose of the offender is to kill a person. Pero wala niya na accomplished, wala niya na effect. Wala niya himo nga mapatay sa tao based on our discussion nga na ay mga intervention, we talk frustrated intervention from a physician or from a third person which is independent of the will sa offender. Sa arisata sa kuan, sa attempted, it's because of the gitawag nato nga reason of cause or accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. Kay kung iyahan na sang spontaneous desistance and on the subjective phase, din na siya held liable. Okay? Second, while in frustrated felony, the offender has performed all the acts of execution, which will produce the felony as a consequence. In attempted felony, the offender merely commences the commission of a felony directly by overt act and does not perform all the acts of execution. So, klaro ta. Klaro ta ha. Ni-perform na siya sa acts of execution. Tanan niya nag-perform. Dayon dire, sa attempted, he does not perform all the acts of execution. So, wala siya naka-perform sa acts of execution. It's because of katong mga reason ganiya akong i-mention, reason by cause or accident, other than spontaneous desistance, then sa frustrated, of course, independent of the will of the perpetrator. Now, let us proceed. Let us distinguish from attempted, frustrated, and impossible crime. Now, in attempted or frustrated and impossible crime, the evil intent of the offender is not accomplished. So, atong klaron, wala na sad na accomplished ang ilang evil intent. See, for example, in killing a person. So, unsay iyang evil intent? So, ang iyang evil intent, of course, mapatay niya iyang target. Mapatay niya iyang gustong patyon. Attempted, wala na patay. Tungod sa causes or accident. Sa frustrated, wala sa namatay. It's because of the independent will of the perpetrator. An impossible crime, wala sa napatay. It's because of the impossibility. Impossibility in the commission of the crime. It's because of inadequate, ineffectual, and inherently impossible to perpetrate the crime. So, wala siya sa kalahian between the attempted, frustrated, and impossible. Now, second paragraph. Or number 2. But, while in possible crime, the evil intent of the offender cannot be accomplished in attempted or frustrated felony. The evil intent of the offender is possible of accomplishment. So, niya na siya sa diri nga posible daw. Nga possible of accomplishment. Kaya nga nang maingon man siya nga possible of accomplishment. Possible of accomplishment kay kung pananglitan walay intervention, walay accident or causes, of course, ma-consummated siya. However, in impossible crime, bisan pag unsaon na siya, dili gina ma-accomplish. Nga naman, kay in the first place, sa impossible crime, ang taong gusto nimong patyon is already dead. Is already wala na kinabuhi. Ha? Kaya unsaon na mag-ingon nga, unsaon nimong pagpatay sa tao nga patay na. How you will inflict an injury to a person that is who has already dead or who has already died. So ang pag-inflict nimo dili nakapilog sakit, wala na siya. Unconscious naman na siya, therefore dili na ka maka-accomplish sa imong evil intent. Nakuha, impossible crime, lisod na di na ka maka-inflict kay patay naman. Muna siya ang gitawag na to nga impossible crime, but on attempted and frustrated na pay posibilidad. Posibilidad lang. Okay? Kay nakasabot naman ta sa attempted and frustrated. Now, third paragraph. In impossible crime, the evil intent of the offender cannot be accomplished because it is inherently impossible. So, I already mentioned this. Inherently impossible of accomplishment, or because the means employed by the offender is inadequate or ineffectual. So, based on my previous discussion, I already mentioned inadequate and effectual, inherently impossible. So, as a recap, mayroon ganitag inherently impossible. So, maybe physical and legal impossibility depending upon the circumstances. Inadequate, meaning, imo na siyang gihilungan. But, because of the quantity nga imong gisagol is wala siyang mamatay. Wala siya nahilo. Ineffectual, sayop ang imuhang gigamit. Instead nga, ang imuhang gituhuan, nga imong gibutang is hilo. But it turns out nga sugar di ay, then there was ineffectual. Nga supposedly, ang imuhang untang sagol is hilo. So, imposible gid nga mamatay ang tao nga imuhang hiluan og kamay. Maybe, naaray matawag nato nga mga kung na siya gitawag nato allergy ba. So, dito ka mahil liable. Depende sa effect sa circumstances. So, inattempted or frustrated, what prevented its accomplishment is the intervention of certain cause or accident in which the offender had no part. So, it's very clear nga iyang gipasabot had no part. Wala siya kalabutan nga na-control or wala mo effect ang kamatayon sa usa ka tawo. And I already discussed it clearly for you to understand between attempted and frustrated. Now, we will proceed on the consummated felony. So, sa inyo na kayong consummated felony. A felony is consummated when all the elements necessary for its execution and accomplishments are present. So, meaning to say, walay nahabilin. There is nothing left behind or there is nothing left to be done. Meaning, kompleto. There is nothing left to be done. Dili pa sa attempted. Kaya sa attempted, na pa may nahabilable. Nahabilin. Napay nahabilin. Kung yung attempted nga naman. Sa attempted, there is anything that the perpetrator need to be done. Unsa man na, ihang pat yun. Ihang ipainom ang hilo, pero wala na himo. Kay tungod lagi sa mga accident or causes nga wala siya kalabutan. Now, sa felony, nga gitawag og consummated, wala na kompletos rikados na siya na naang kompletong elements na pusil, na matay. Muna siya gitawag consummated. Si for example, si A, yang gipusil si B. Dayon, pag-abot sa ospital, gitambalan sa doktor. Sige tambal, sige revive, wala, patay na. Or else, katong hilo, gihiloan niya si B. Si A, gihiloan ni B. Ay, si B, gihiloan ni A. Karon gihiloan, gidala sa ospital. Pag-abot sa ospital, dito na rival. Nabay intervention from other third person? Wala. Nga naman, patay naman. Sa ano yung pagbuhi nga patay naman. Therefore, consummated ang felony. Ang iyahang gustong mahitabo is nahitabo. Okay? Nasabtan? Ang attempted, frustrated, and consummated. Now, before I will end this discussion, I will include some crimes that has or that have attempted, frustrated, and consummated stage. Now, we will discuss on the crime of rape. In the crime of rape, there is an attempted stage, but there is no frustrated stage. But there is consummated stage. Paliko na ko, sa rape, naay attempted, walay frustrated, og naay consummated. So, walay frustrated ha. When we talk of consummated rape, a touching of the minor, the touching of the labia majora or labia minora, of the victim's pudendum, of the erect P, of the accused, nga padung siya na siya capability of penetration to the B of the victim is considered as a consummated rape. Balikon ako ha. When we talk of consummated rape, it is a mere touching on the labia majora or the labia minora of the victim's pudendum of the erect P of the accused which has capacity or capable of penetration nga pwede siyang masulod ngadto sa V ni victim. So that is consummated rape. While kung mingon ta og attempted, attempted rape, wala siya'y touching of the katong labia minora or mihora, wala siya. But you have the intent to have sexual intercourse to the victim. See, for example, imuha na siyang padung nga ikuan, but sige nimo kuan, wala gid na siya papenetrate nimo. Wala siya nimo mapapenetrate. Therefore, there is an attempted stage. See for example, si A, iyahanggi, gusto niyang luguson si B. Now, dito na siya sa kwarto. Naghimo na siya sa mga iyahang mga moves in order to have sexual intercourse. Ngadto ni B. Now, iyahan ang gihubuan, so for example, dayon padung na niya untang ipapenetrate ang iyang erect P, nakita niya na si C namuso. Namuso si C. Now, gaday-dali siya ilis og wala niya gidayon ang pag-commit sa rape. There is a clear intent to have sexual intercourse. Di ba? Klaro kay sa facts. Now, wala niya nahitabo nga mahilabtan si B tungod ni kinsa man ni C nga namuso. Therefore, nate attempted stage. Atong i-apply ang attempted stage. Unsay gingon ganiya sa attempted stage? Ni ana ta nga commences to the commission of felony directly by overt acts. Unsa may iyang commence ana? Unsa iyang external acts? Ang katong paghukas, pagpanghikap-hikap didto sa private parts ni B. Karon, directly by overt acts. Yes, there is a direct connection in the crime of rape. Dayon, does not perform all the acts of execution. Yes, wala niya na-perform ang acts of execution to produce a felony. Yes, wala gid niya na-produce. Nga naman, naamatay gitawag og by reason or cause. By reason of cause or accident other than his own spontaneous desistance. Unsay cause? Naasisi namuso. Maoy nakahimong rason nga wala niya gilugos. Maybe nahadlok siya, na-intimidate siya kay ayay mahibaw-an ko nga ako'y naglugos. So ingana ba? Therefore wala nahitabo nga naay penetration, naay touching on the labia majora. But the act of A is considered already nga naa siya intent to have sexual intercourse to B. Muna yung pinaka-importante. Therefore, the crime committed by A is on the attempted stage for the crime of rape. Okay. Now, let us proceed. Last na ni. On the crime of arson. So, arson ta. On the crime of arson, there is an attempted stage, there is a prostrated stage, and there is a consummated stage. Now, arson. Arita sa gitawag na to nga attempted stage. Here comes A. Nagdala siya og iyang gibubuan. Si for example, iyang gibubuan og kanana ang gasolina ang balay ni B nga composed of light materials. Now, padung siya mudagkot sa posporo, padung siya mudagkot sa posporo para idungka atong gidala og giyabon niya ng gasolina. Pero nadakpan siya sa police officer. Dagkot padung nadakpan. So, muna yung gitawag na itong attempted arson. Kaya nga naman, dakpan, dagkot, dakpan, giyabo na ang gas. Wala pa nakasitog fire. So, that is according to the case of US versus Gokong. I-research na lang, US versus Gokong nga, pagdagkot, nadakpan sa police. So, there was an attempted stage for the crime of arson. Wala pa nakasitog fire, Nagyabo pas gasolina, nadakpan. But in this case, nga silbi na adyo kay plano good nga sunugon pero nagbitbit kag gas. Bitbit kag gas padung sa balay. Now naa si police officer. Gingon ka i-aresto ti ka kay nagbitbit kag gas. So dili pwede nga naman. Kana na sang gihimo gibitbit og gas parehara na sa akong gidiscuss ganiha. Nga it is considered as a preparatory acts. Preparation pa na siya nimo. Kung sa imong buhaton, still, it is uncertain. Still, it is unequivocal. Still, it is unclear. Dili pa na nimo mahibaw-an. Nga, sa may buhaton niya ning gas, di ba? Pero, sa katong gihatin ng example, nga gibobo na niyang gas, ngadto sa balay ni Bay, which is light materials, then apan, mudagkot siya, nadakpan siya sa police officer. So, pwede na ito makonsidered as an attempted arson. Nga naman, na may act of execution. Nanay act of execution. Wala na ta sa preparatory acts. Ning sulod na ta sa acts of execution. Nga pwede na itong i-apply ang different stages. Now, kay padung siya mudagkot, nadakpan, so attempted arson. Now, we will proceed to the prostrated arson. Prostrated arson. It is in the case of US versus Valdez. In the case of US versus Valdez, so nasa yung mga panapton, nagisok niya or iyang gi hulog silbi sa katong nagapuno kayo nga gasolina o kerosene. So karon iya na sang gidungka ngadto sa light materials nga balay. Pero nagpalayo siya kay para dili siya masakpan, mabito ni gamit siya panapton kay para adto niya padaganon ang kayo. Now, before reaching ngadto sa balay is napahong. Napahong ang iyahang gidungka nga kayo nga ning-agi didto sa naay gitawag nato nga kerosene nga panapton. Naay kerosene nga panapton gibutang nga gasolina. Now napahong, wa kaabot sa balay. So according to the US versus Valdez, in the case of US versus Valdez, that act of the accused is considered on the prostrated stage. You know what, class? This case of US versus Valdez is still controlling. Controlling ba siya? Because in the case of People versus Bone, decided in October 2006, People versus Bone People versus Bone. Gi-apply ang kaso ni US versus Valdez on the case of prostrated arson. Provided class, nga the same facts and circumstances para ma-apply nimo. Di ba niyo ko light materials? What if ang gipadaganan sa kayo is simento siya? So dili siya pwede nimo i-apply ang gitawag nato nga prostrated arson nga gidesisyonan on the case of US versus Valdez and later used for the crime for the case of People versus Bone, which was decided October 2006. Nga naman, light materials man tong ilahan niya, karon kay simentado man, so wala na apply. Now, nasabtan ang stages. or sa pag-acts of execution para masulod sa attempted and frustrated. Now, alita sa consummated. Gidungka. Balik ta sa katungan. Gidungka. Pak. Siga. Dayon, pag siga, na sunog. Nasunog ang pultahan og dapit sa sala. Wala siya nahurot. Wala nahurot ang balay og pagkasunog. So, unsan siya nga stage? Attempted, frustrated, consummated. So, kana siya class is on the consummated stage. Nga naman, bisan pa ug wala nahurot og kasunog ang balay, as long as nasunog any small portion or any part of the house, it will constitute consummated arson. Sabtan? Or in case of a building, basta kay masunog o gamay, magsunugan, say for example, half of the first floor, niya third floor tanan nga building, nasunog, consummated arson. Nasabtan? So, for that, I hope you understand more about the definition on the attempted, frustrated, and consummated. Once again, thank you for watching and see you for next video. God bless us all.